I'm Alfredo Carbajal, editor from Al Día here in Dallas, Texas. And with me today, I have Alfredo Corchado, who is the Mexico and border correspondent for the Dallas Morning News and Al Día. Welcome, Alfredo.
I'm also known as the other Alfredo.
The other Alfredo, that's right. We're here today to talk about stories happening in Mexico and the U.S.-Mexico border, and some dynamics also happening with Texas. A lot of things are happening, and we want to take the opportunity to talk to Alfredo about some of the reporting that he's doing. Let's start with Mexico. Let's go to Mexico City, the capital. The elected president, Andrés Manuel López Obrador, he is about 2 months shy of taking office in December 1st. Tell us about where he is at right now. He has his cabinet appointment completed. What are the challenges that he's facing? What are the prospects? What's in the air?
Well, there's still a lot of, I guess, a celebratory mood in Mexico. I mean, he won the election in July. Some people would maybe complain or question whether the period between July and December 1st, which is when he's inaugurated, whether that's a bit too long. In some parts of the country, there's a sense of a power vacuum. Violence continues to be a major issue, security. But I think for Mr. López Obrador, it's also a good time in that NAFTA was finally ratified. Not NAFTA, but the United States-Mexico-Canadian agreement was ratified. So that gives him one less thing to worry about, one big thing to worry about, not to worry about. And I also think it helps the outgoing president, Enrique Peña Nieto, maybe begin to repair part of his legacy. This is the president who had invited then candidate Donald Trump to Mexico City, and he took a lot of flack. But now maybe his team can say it worked to try to create a closer relationship with the Trump administration. And
so talking about NAFTA and or the trade agreement replacing NAFTA, how do Mexicans feel? We understand there are different people in the country, the business class and also the working class and also other parts of the country. They may have different sentiments about this trade agreement. Have you gathered any sentiments that may tell us about how Mexico is preparing for this new stage?
I mean, I think long-term Mexicans have been divided over NAFTA. I think there's a sense that it's created this economic interdependence between the United States and Mexico, and to break that apart, it could leave many Mexicans feeling much more uncertain about the future than they do today. But at the same time, Mexicans have looked since 1994 when NAFTA came about and questioned whether the country is really that better off. I mean, it's created economic opportunities, but the economic development throughout the country is still a big question mark. I mean, the economic growth has been 1.9%, which is low, not that high. The poverty rate in Mexico remains more than 50%, and it decimated so many industries. I mean, the agriculture, that it forced a lot of people off their lands and forced a lot of people to immigrate to the United States. So it's still a big question mark. But when you have a country that it depends, 80% of its exports on the United States, it's hard to break that apart. I mean, it's hard to say, okay, we're going to a new future or a new, something post NAFTA. That's, I think, for a lot of generations in Mexico, that's a big question mark. I mean, what exactly does that mean?
So that's about the economy and trade and NAFTA. Let's talk a little bit about migration. So López Obrador is going to get to the office on December 1st, and now because of immigration policies here in the United States, there are now hundreds of thousands of Mexicans who have been deported back into Mexico, and that's one element. The other is also, based on the reporting that you've done and that we've seen, is also a lot of Central Americans that they're in hopes to cross into the United States. Now they're staying in Mexico. Tell us about that pressure, about the internal dynamics about migration. That Mexico used to be just the path to the north. Now it's a recipient country of migration as well.
It's a destination point. I mean, yeah, you're right. I mean, I think one of the things that I sort of questioned during the campaign when López Obrador would talk about creating enough jobs to keep Mexicans from going north. the question was, there are that many Mexicans who are seeking to come across, and we've seen the numbers. I mean, we're at historic lows these days, where less and less Mexicans are coming across, and you see it in the United States through labor shortages. I think the biggest challenge when it comes to a binational relationship, with Mexico City and Washington D.C. In the months to come as López Obrador takes office, is the challenge being posed by Central American immigrants going north, and Mexicans in the United States being deported back to Mexico. I mean, we are seeing tens of thousands of hundreds of thousands of people who are now in Mexico, and the challenge for López Obrador is to create enough jobs for them, to keep them, and to try to maybe see them as an opportunity. People who came back from the United States and who were trying to make their own American dream in Mexico. At the same time, you're seeing a lot more Central Americans who look to Mexico as a destination point, as a place to be. That also creates a big challenge for the new administration.
Is that mostly in the southern border of Mexico, or where is that happening?
It's really throughout Mexico. I mean, the southern border, I think historically has always had this migration between Guatemala, Honduras, Chiapas, Tabasco, some of these southern states. But you're seeing more and more Central Americans in Mexico City, in Querétaro, and in the region called El Bajío. And I think long term, the question is, how will Mexico's own tolerance and its own generosity is being tested? I mean, Mexico's had a long history of accepting people who are seeking refugee status. But I mean, this is Central America. It's a whole different dynamic there.
So, staying with Mr. López Obrador, traditionally Mexican presidents, when they're elected, they come to the States and they meet with officials, either Washington, D.C. or some other states, like California and Texas. Any indication that Mr. López Obrador is planning to come to Texas or any other state or even Washington?
I mean, it's been talked about is how do you avoid a future confrontation with the Trump administration? I mean, you have to remember President Trump has a very strong base in the United States. I mean, we write about that a lot. It's been said many times. But the incoming administration, specifically Andrés Manuel López Obrador, has his own base in Mexico. And so there's concern that, if you have a Twitter war between the two, you're also appealing to both of these bases. And just like the United States has become, more nationalistic, Mexico can become more nationalistic. And in that, in that kind of scenario, I don't know that either side wins. So one of the things I do hear from people close to the administration or part of the administration is maybe having more of a relationship with key states, whether it's California, whether it's Texas, whether it's Michigan, whether it's Arizona or Ohio. Try to, make it more of a state DF kind of relationship, and we're already seeing that. I mean, we're seeing people traveling back and forth. I know Texas is planning a big delegation to go to Mexico City before the inauguration, and it's with that aim, keep things together, while and try to avoid that future confrontation that we saw under Peña Nieto and President Trump.
So, considering all the factors that you just talked about, in Texas, what do we need to be looking out for?
I think, there's several things to look in Texas. I mean, the border security is always a big thing. And El Paso, as we reported recently, we're seeing the first signs of we know it as people live in El Paso as a boulder 18-foot high fence. Authorities there now call it a wall. Mm-hmm. And I think that's part of trying to resonate with President Trump's narrative of a wall. But that's going up, and that's going to create, I think, create more tension between the United States and Mexico, but specifically El Paso, Ciudad Juárez, to see how these two cities, with the historic, they're so intertwined economically, culturally, with families on both sides of the border. It'd be interesting to see how they react. I think it's interesting to look at future labor shortages in Texas. How that will continue to grow as more Mexicans decide to stay in Mexico and not come to the United States. And then
Are you
the
talking
other
about
thing,
labor shortages on the fields or in the cities?
fields, construction, the service industry, etc.
Throughout the economy.
Throughout the economy, but we're also seeing more middle class Mexicans. I mean, the circle of migration, the people who are coming here legally, who go back and forth. Companies moving to North Texas because of geography. That's a trend that we continue to monitor very closely, because it's going to, I think, in some ways, it's going to help define both the relationship between both countries in the years to come.
Thanks a lot.
Thank you.
Hasta la próxima.
¿Qué onda?